Hello everybody, I'm Cantonese Cat. Hey everybody, Cantonese Cat here. At S&P 500 have included Palantir. This has been something that's been talked about for quite some time. A lot of people are getting really scared about this because they think that S&P 500 inclusion actually may mean that the stock's a little bit toppy. People generally like to buy the rumor and sell the news. Do you think that this is one of those events where people are going to end up buying the rumor and sell the news, and how bad this can get? Well, we'll talk about it. Let's talk about why people they're starting to get worried. Initially, like last year or two, a lot of companies get entering into S&P 500. Everybody's like super excited about it because basically it just means that there's going to be a lot of buying pressure for these companies moving forward, because there has to be a lot of passive buying through fund managers, through index funds, retirement funds. They just have to keep buying it, right? So over time, these are positive catalysts, but the question is whether or not people are selling the news and how bad can the news get. A lot of people really got scared because of two recent additions to the S&P 500 that hasn't done well immediately afterwards, right? One is CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike has done absolutely poorly after the inclusion in S&P 500. It got included in June of 2024. And then right after that, it had the big, giant red candle that happened in July. Now, this also coincides with the fact that there's also a lot of issues with their network, with their software upgrades. That actually, to me, is actually more bullish than bearish, because it just tells you how much they can affect and how important they are to the world. But regardless, the way to kind of think about it, the way to kind of look at this is each stock follow their own technicals, each stock follow their own fundamentals, and each stock follow their own destiny. Right? So I can totally see why S&P 500 could potentially be a lot of hype going into it, and there could be a lot of buying rumors, sell the news. I can potentially see that. Just like anytime when you have an IPO, there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of overstretched valuation, things like that. I can totally see that. But when the inclusion happens in relations to the stock price, action matters a lot. So for example, what I mean by that is if you look at what CrowdStrike has been doing before the addition into S&P 500, it basically is a stock that went more than double. It actually tripled and quadrupled within a matter of like a year and a half, right before it got included, right? It quadrupled ever since January 2023, all the way to June of 2024, right? And whenever that happens, and you have all of these monthly candles that are just closing way above the upper Bollinger Band 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, that really tells you that there's a lot of exhaustion when it comes to this bull trend. Whenever you have a push like this, that really tells you that, hey, something's got to give. This is not sustainable. You're going to have a correction, right? And this really does go through, like, if you're into Elliott waves, you can clearly see that this is wave 1, 2, 3 is usually the longest, right? And usually it's the most parabolic. Got everybody really hyped up over here. 4 and then 5, and that's it. And next thing you know, you are once again closing about the upper Bollinger Band, and that's it. Like, this is completely exhausted trend. You're going up on our side of the high 70s, and you probably need some kind of correction because it broke out from the 20-month moving average and still haven't really back tested it. And finally did it, back tested it, passed, right? So far looking pretty decent. You're hitting a little bit of resistance there, but I think the context is to think about the addition of CrowdStrike into S&P 500 really was happening on this big giant parabolic move that happened around 17-18 months with multiple candles closing about the monthly Bollinger Band, and you're asking for a correction, right? So that is one thought in terms of CrowdStrike. The other thought, a lot of people got really scared by S&P 500 inclusion now, and actually thought that this might be bearish and that Palantir could end up going down a lot further. Look no further than SMCI, which is basically a stock. Like, you don't even count how price just slowly ran up ever since 2019, right? We just talk about the parabolic stage, or let's just talk about from April of 2022 all the way up to like around March 2024. So within 2 year span, it basically made a 25x, and there were multiple candles that were closing above the upper Bollinger Band. There are candles that are closing way outside the upper Bollinger Band twice, right? So this is what the definition of like a blow-up top or complete exhaustion. When you have something like this and you have something like that. And all it really is doing is just trying to retrace back to the mean. Now, granted, it made a 25x, so when we back tested the 20-month moving average, it went below it now. You know, maybe it's trying to back test the horizontal zone over here around the 300s. It's such a big giant parabolic move, and the RSI on the monthly went all the way up to the 90s. Like, what is this, like Bitcoin, right? Whenever you have something like this had happened, with all of these crazy parabolic movement, with, you know, some expected correction through time and price, but the overall trend is just absolutely insane, right? Like if you look at a 2-month chart, how many candles do you close on a 2-month chart way outside of the Bollinger Band, right? I can count like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you know, and these two close back, you know, inside, and then you have a big giant, you know, 8th one right here, just way outside of the Bollinger Band. This is what like a definition of like a trend exhaustion, if you will. The fundamentals could still be great, you know, but it's just insane, right? Look at our 3-month chart, right? How many 3-month candles did close outside of the Bollinger Band? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right? So you're talking about bearish going into S&P 500 inclusion around March 2024. Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of hype that happened, and it's basically just correcting and doing what it needs to do, right? Just give you some context in terms of what's happening. Now, there are a couple other stocks too that have gone through S&P 500 inclusion. For example, Tesla. Tesla had gone through inclusion, I believe it is back in December of 2020, right? If you're talking about it being at the part of the cycle where it is starting to get a little bit exhausted, but it wants to make another leg up, that's exactly what Tesla did, right? Got included around December, the price is around 200, eventually pushed and make a 2x, went up to 400, right? But it wasn't because the S&P 500 inclusion is bearish, it's just that it needed to digest this big giant move all the way from like $12 all the way up to $200. Like it made essentially close to like a 15-20x within a span of about a year and a half, right? So correcting sideways is warranted, and it still pushed up and made another higher high because that's just the natural structure of this wave over here, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So the technicals of Tesla is basically telling you, yeah, it should be doing what it's supposed to be doing. And the S&P 500, honestly, like it's going to be a great news coming on, moving forward for a longer period of time. But a shorter period of time, Tesla is still going to end up following its technicals. It basically is just doing what it's supposed to be doing. So far I have 3 stocks that are kind of doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. Let's look for a little bit more in the past in terms of other stocks we'd be interested to look at. Look at Uber. Right. Uber also got included back in December 2023, which is not that far ago. And when Uber got included, it actually had really 2 really green candles that happened afterwards. Now, granted, the technicals have went so far for about a year and a half that it's starting to close outside the upper Bollinger Band here on the monthly, and it just basically went back and retraced the mean, right? So Uber is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. There's really nothing like, you know, scary about that, and you would imagine a name like Uber would be like, yeah, I don't know, man, you know, it got included, we all should be scared, right? I don't know about that. Now, look at AMD. When did AMD get included in the S&P 500? It got included in the S&P 500 in March of 2017, right? What happened before that? Well, it made a big giant move all the way from like $1.50 to $2, all the way up to like $15, right? So it really made like a 7 or 8x within that period of time before the inclusion. What happened after that? There's a little bit of choppiness over here, right? Maybe they're trying to sell the news. Maybe it needs to digest the fact that it got included. Maybe it got front ran a little bit too hard. It just did nothing for a whole year. But then the rest is history, right? Like if you were to buy AMD at around the time where it got included around $14, you would have made like about a 10x at this point. And that was just back in 2017. Like it hasn't really even been like 10 years yet, right? And that's essentially a 10x. So that's just something to kind of think about. If you have time, you have patience, and if you don't mind getting hurt for short term when they end up selling the news, and even the selling the news for AMD back in 2017 really wasn't that drastic, even though it did end up making a lot of these crazy moves, like how many candles did it close above the upper blow in Japan, right? On the monthly chart, it didn't really make that big of a correction. I think that it basically just went from like 15 all the way down to maybe like single digits here, around like $9 or $10. A 50% correction, maybe a little bit more. No, sorry, a 33 to 35% correction, maybe a little bit more. And the next thing you know, it just made candles number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it just end up tripling from there, right? They all kind of following their own technicals is kind of what I'm trying to say. Let's look at a little bit more older stocks like Meta. What did Meta do? Meta actually made a all-time high by the time it got included in S&P 500 in December 2013, right? So the way I see it is, yeah, it did have a pretty drastic move up, right? And up until a point it hits the area where it got included S&P 500. But before that, you had about a whole 2 years of deleveraging from its IPO and accumulation, right? With this deleveraging and accumulation, these candles are not that scary. And even after the inclusion, you end up having a lot of buying pressure that came in a couple months immediately after. And then after that, the rest is history, right? I mean, you did end up having a great deleveraging over here too, but like the rest is history, right? If you would have bought Meta back around $50 when it first got IPO'd, and that was closer about like maybe a little over 10 years ago, just about a decade ago, right? You were at 10x your money, right? So just to kind of show you, I think a lot of people are scared about Palantir getting included, and a lot of people really looking to kind of sell the news. I'm not sure if it's necessarily warranted, because over the last 5 years, I should say 4 years, after it did a direct price offering in DPO, all it did really was a great deleveraging that happened for about 2 years straight, and accumulation that happened soon after that, right? Immediately after that, and this is happening on a lot of macro fears, right? This is happening on the fact that there's a point where Palantir's looking like they're not really going to meet many like growth rates at all. Like this looks like they're like no commercial growth at all, right? And then the entire story have flipped whenever the AI narrative comes, whenever companies actually start to use Palantir as a way to make their companies run a lot more efficient, to actually be able to have a lot of deflationary forces, and to actually have increasing number of customers and growing back in an exponential phase, the stock price have reacted, right? And what you're really seeing here is, yeah, it looks scary because price have went all the way down from like $6 all the way up to like $30. Are you talking about a 5x already from the bottom, right? Well, how many people bought at the bottom? How many people sold Palantir at $8? How many people are shorting Palantir at like $15, thinking it's gonna go down lower? How many people called a head and shoulder pattern that never materialized? How many people end up calling that, hey, whenever it gets to about $20, it's gonna come back down further? And right now we're at $30. This, $6 to about $30 happened in a matter of about, close to 2 years, right? But we still haven't really hit our previous all-time high, which is around $45. And currently there's a lot more support down below than resistance, right? Now let's say objectively, let's say that yes, there's a big giant move and a lot of people are anticipating the S&P 500 inclusion. But the reality is that even without the S&P 500 inclusion, the question is whether or not the valuation for Palantir is still justifiable. and whether or not this big giant move is really too parabolic and it needs to be corrected, right? I'm gonna let the fundamental guys like Amit and Garcia to kind of tell you a little bit more about what they think, right? Because that's not my forte. I am bullish on the fundamentals of Palantir. It is my biggest position, but I'm not gonna pretend that I know what I'm talking about, right? I'm gonna let them talk more about the fundamentals. All I can say is that I have great faith in the fundamentals. And I also don't think the technicals are really that overstretched. And I'll show you why here. If you look at the monthly, if I get rid of all these drawings over here, and if you just look at the Bollinger Band, which is what I've shown for all the other stocks so far, right? As well as you look at the RSI, which is what I've shown for all the other stocks so far, right? You really haven't had that parabolic move with Palantir that end up having multiple monthly closes about the upper Bollinger Band. You really haven't. This big giant crazy move had happened on the backs of having this big giant crazy move downwards. And because of that, all we're really doing is just riding up along the upper Bollinger Band, but not getting too far overextended. That's what's really happening on the technicals of Palantir. And because of that, and I just show you a lot of the other charts, that, like recent additions over the last 5-10 years, especially over the last year or so, a lot of people get kind of scared about it, you know, because they saw what happened to CrowdStrike, what happened to Airbnb, which I didn't show, by the way, and also what happened to SMCI. They think that the same thing's going to happen to Palantir. I'm just not so sure that that's necessarily going to happen, because the technicals don't really support it. The RSI did get a little bit overheated, but it's still in the 60s, right? I mean, there's just potentially just a lot more room for it to run up, and I don't think we've really hit a lot of the euphoria stage quite just yet. It's kind of crazy to think about, because price did end up making a 5x, but the technical still doesn't really look like they're that overstretched. If you ask me in terms of what the potential downside target prices are, what price could end up doing, I'll give you 3 scenarios. I do think that price is getting a little bit towards resistance here. I'll give you 3 different scenarios here. One scenario is that $30 hold, and I would also kind of tell you why I think $30 hold. But that's one scenario, $30 hold, right? And then we just go up from there and we hit 35, 36, 37, somewhere up there, probably 35. And that would be the end of you know, this big short-term uptrend, because there's still a lot of, you know, buying pressure that's coming in for Palantir, and maybe there's some, you know, fund managers just realize, hey, oh crap, you know, we've been like bearish on Palantir, we need to get in, right? That's the bulls narrative. Like I can totally see 30 holding and going up. My base case is that it goes like, you know, even though after hours on Friday, S&P 500 inclusion, price went from like 30.3 all the way up to 32.7, right? But 32.7 is still not quite the higher high quite just yet. And there could be a lot of like market makers, and as well as a lot of traders. I pretty much, like, all the traders I talk with this weekend are basically saying they're going to sell Palantir on Monday. And they're going to buy it back around 25, 28 on Monday. I can see the case of going back to down like to like 28, 27. I can see that. That would be completely reasonable, and that would actually be more or less would be like my primary case. It can potentially hit like this diagonal line over here, or it can hit the volume shelf over here, anywhere from like 27, 28. I can see that happening just because Wall Street's going to play their game and traders are going to play their game. But whenever it gets down there, I think people are going to end up calling for like 25 or lower. I'm not sure we're going to hit 25, but that's also a possible scenario. Even if that happens, that would be a higher low, and that'd be extremely bullish, right? So if it gets down to like 27, 28, I'm buying. I haven't really been buying for quite many weeks now. But if it goes down to like 27, 28, I'm buying, right? If I'm buying, you know, I haven't bought for a long time. If I'm buying, it makes me wonder whether or not other people are thinking the same. It makes me wonder whether or not we're going to end up dropping down to this level. I don't know. I really don't know. I can totally see that the bull case would be it just hits like 35, 36, 37 coming up next. My base case would be around 27, 28 and then bounce. My bear case would be it hits around 25. and then bounce from there. That really is my thinking. Now, can there be a bear case where it just goes down a lot further? Sure it can, right? I'm not gonna sit around talking about all kinds of scenario like it's just gonna break the channel and go up like crazy. Like, I'm not gonna say that. I'm also not gonna say it's gonna necessarily break down the channel, right? Because the truth is it's gonna be really hard for it to do that on a technical basis. Like right now you have a 20-week moving average just around like 25 or so. Here, let me kind of go through each of the case in terms of why I think what I'm thinking, right? First of all, I'm going to get rid of all these stuff right here. First of all, I'm going to draw a rough Fibonacci level. I'm going to try to refine it. I can tell you why I think $30 is a pretty important zone. Ignore the fork right here because it's not really calibrated for the monthly, right? But let me calibrate the Fibonacci retracement levels here, right? The coordinates, I'm going to have to refine it. The top's going to be $45 exact. The bottom price is going to be 5.92, right? So if you do that, there's going to be a very important number, very important number. I think a lot of people underestimate the number, 0.618 Fibonacci. That's the golden ratio. That is probably arguably the most important number in Fibonacci sequence. And we are using $30 potentially as support. You know, we bounce underneath of that so far for the month, but we are using that as potential support, right? The fact that it broke above 0.618, broke above $30 is important because now you got a potential support zone right there, right? So I can totally see it maybe wicking down a little bit further and going up higher. You know, I'm not saying that it won't go down below $30, but the bull case could potentially be around 30, maybe a little bit lower, wicking down below again to test the zone around 29, and then just go up again, right? That's one possibility. The other possibility, I'm going to show you some other support zone over here too, right? The Ichimoku on the weekly, you have the Tenkan Nikkei right there around 27. The Super Ichi, you have the Tenkan Nikkei. Tenkan's already right around 29 bucks. I think we already kind of back tested a little bit close to that. And you have the Nikkei also around 27 bucks, right? And then you're also looking at Fibonacci support band right underneath around 25, 26, you know. So a lot of support down below. Like I just don't know whether or not it's going to end up just plummeting down, right? On the monthly chart, if you're also looking at the Ichimoku, can it go down potentially to like 24.5? Entirely possible, right? So I don't think it necessarily has to come down to like 19 or 18. I think there's just a lot of buying pressure. And the fact is that it just isn't that overextended here on the monthly Bollinger Band. And it's also not that overextended on the weekly Bollinger Band. I think this thing has a long way to run, to be honest. Like, this is one of the most sustainable bull trend I've seen for a lot of stocks. And yeah, it's giving us a lot of opportunity to really end up buying the dip during these like $5 ranges. I'm also not sure whether or not it's going to end up doing this like $5 range forever. And I think that there might be a little bit more of like a euphoric stage that could come for Palantir that hasn't come quite just yet. But I'm just talking, right? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is all sell the news. Maybe it goes down to like back to like the lower Bollinger Band over here on the weekly around 18, 19. Maybe it backtests the rising 20 here around 19. Who knows? So far, the fundamentals and technicals are not pointing that to be the likely scenario. But who knows, right? You can talk all kinds of crap all you want, but you know, please show us your reasoning and logic. That's all I have to ask for. Anyway, thank you for listening to me. Have a good one. Bye.